Story 1. John Mathers was a seasoned journalist known for his tenacity and knack for uncovering the truth. When reports of mysterious disappearances in a remote village called Eldridge reached his desk, he knew he had to investigate. The village, located deep in the countryside, was shrouded in secrecy and superstition, making it a perfect story for John. The journey to Eldridge was long and arduous, with winding roads that seemed to stretch endlessly. As John drove through the dense forest surrounding the village, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for him. He shrugged off the eerie sensation, attributing it to his overactive imagination. Upon arriving in Eldridge, John immediately noticed the unwelcoming atmosphere. The villagers were wary of outsiders, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. The air was thick with an unsettling tension, and John couldn't help but feel like he was stepping into a place forgotten by time. He checked into the only inn in the village, a decrepit building with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper. The innkeeper, an old woman with a hunched back and piercing eyes, gave him a stern warning. "You best be careful, stranger. Eldridge is no place for prying eyes," she said cryptically. Undeterred, John began his investigation by speaking to the villagers. Most were reluctant to talk, quickly averting their gaze or making excuses to leave. However, he eventually found an elderly man named Samuel who was willing to share the village's dark history. Samuel recounted the tale of a demonic entity that had plagued Eldridge for centuries. According to legend, the villagers had made a pact with the entity to ensure bountiful harvests and protection from outside threats. In return, they had to offer a sacrifice every decade. Those who refused or tried to leave the village would face the entity's wrath. As John delved deeper into the village's history, he discovered records of the disappearances. Each one coincided with the entity's required sacrifice. The villagers' fear and hostility towards outsiders made sense now. They were trying to protect their secret and ensure the sacrifices continued. One night, John was awoken by a chilling scream. He rushed outside to find a crowd gathered around a small house. Pushing through the throng, he saw a young woman, pale and trembling, pointing towards the forest. "It took him! The entity took my husband!" she cried. John's journalistic instincts kicked in, and he decided to follow the trail into the forest. Armed with a flashlight and his notebook, he ventured into the dark woods. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunch of leaves under his feet. As he went deeper, the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches forming a twisted canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Suddenly, John felt a presence behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The air grew colder, and an oppressive sense of dread washed over him. He quickened his pace, his flashlight flickering as if it, too, was afraid. He came upon a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood. The sight of it sent shivers down his spine. The ground was stained dark with what he could only assume was blood. As he approached, he heard whispers, faint at first but growing louder and more insistent. John turned to leave but found his path blocked by a shadowy figure. The entity loomed before him, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. John's flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. The whispers grew to a deafening roar, and he felt an icy hand grip his shoulder. Fighting the urge to flee, John steeled himself and faced the entity. "I know your secret," he said, his voice steady despite the terror gnawing at him. "I'll expose you and the village." The entity's grip tightened, and John felt his strength ebbing away. Just as he thought he would succumb, the whispers ceased, and the entity vanished. Gasping for breath, John stumbled back to the village. He knew he had to leave Eldridge and report what he had discovered. As he drove away, he glanced back at the village. The residents watched him go, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and resignation. John realized that by exposing their secret, he might condemn them to a fate worse than death. Back in his office, John wrote the story of Eldridge, detailing the cursed village and its demonic pact. He submitted the article, but as the days turned into weeks, he received no response. When he inquired, he was told that the piece had been lost, and no one remembered ever receiving it. John knew then that the entity's reach extended far beyond Eldridge. It had silenced him and protected its secret. The village remained cursed, and the sacrifices continued, with John left haunted by the knowledge of the darkness that lurked in the heart of Eldridge. Story 2. Elena had always loved collecting antiques, so when she found an ornate mirror at a flea market, she couldn't resist. The mirror was beautiful, with an intricate frame that seemed to tell a story of its own. She bought it on the spot and took it home to her new apartment, excited to add it to her collection. Elena hung the mirror in her bedroom, admiring how it seemed to make the room look larger and more elegant. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she noticed something odd. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a shadow move across the reflection. She turned quickly but saw nothing unusual. Shaking off the feeling, she went to sleep. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Elena would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror out of the corner of her eye. At first, she dismissed them as tricks of the light or her imagination, but the occurrences became more frequent and more disturbing. She started seeing the shadow more clearly, a dark, humanoid figure that seemed to watch her from within the mirror. One night, Elena woke up to a feeling of intense dread. She looked towards the mirror and saw the shadow figure standing behind her reflection, its eyes glowing a menacing red. Paralyzed with fear, she could only watch as it seemed to reach out towards her. She turned on the light and the figure disappeared, but the sense of being watched remained. Desperate for answers, Elena began researching the mirror's history. She discovered that it once belonged to a sorcerer who was notorious for dabbling in dark magic. The sorcerer was said to have trapped a vengeful spirit inside the mirror as part of a ritual, and anyone who owned the mirror would be haunted by the spirit's malevolence. Armed with this knowledge, Elena tried to get rid of the mirror. She took it down and left it outside, hoping someone would take it away. The next morning, she found the mirror back in its place, hanging on her bedroom wall as if it had never been moved. Panic set in as she realized the spirit was not going to let her go that easily. The hauntings intensified. Elena started hearing whispers and seeing the shadow figure more often. It would appear in other mirrors and reflective surfaces, always watching, always waiting. Her friends began to notice her growing paranoia and exhaustion, but they couldn't see the shadow, and she feared they thought she was losing her mind. One evening, determined to rid herself of the mirror once and for all, Elena smashed it to pieces with a hammer. The moment the glass shattered, a piercing scream filled the room, and the shadow figure emerged from the shards, more terrifying than ever. It lunged at her, and she felt an icy grip around her throat. In her final moments of consciousness, Elena remembered reading about an occult expert in a neighboring town. With her last ounce of strength, she grabbed her phone and managed to call the expert, gasping out her address before everything went dark. Elena woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and weak. The occult expert, an older woman named Margaret, was sitting by her side. Margaret explained that she had performed a banishing ritual to contain the spirit, but the mirror was too powerful to destroy completely. It had been relocated to a secure location where it could do no more harm. Elena was relieved but knew she would never be the same. The shadow in the mirror had left a mark on her soul, a constant reminder of the darkness she had faced. She moved out of her apartment, leaving behind her antique collection and starting fresh, but the memories of the haunted mirror would always haunt her dreams. Story 3. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when 5 friends, Jake, Sarah, Tom, Emily, and Lisa decided to venture into the dense forest for a weekend camping trip. They had been planning this getaway for months, eager to escape the stresses of city life. As they drove deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around them. The GPS signal faded, leaving them to rely on an old map they had found online. After hours of driving, they finally arrived at a secluded clearing by a small lake. "Perfect spot," Jake said, grinning as he stepped out of the car. The others agreed, and they quickly set up their tents and started a campfire. The first night was peaceful, filled with laughter and ghost stories around the campfire. But the next day, while exploring the forest, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was hidden behind thick underbrush, almost as if the forest was trying to keep it a secret. "This is creepy," Emily said, shivering despite the warm sunlight. "Let's check it out," Tom suggested, his curiosity piqued. Inside, the cabin was covered in dust and cobwebs. The furniture was old and decaying, and strange symbols were etched into the walls. They found a journal that belonged to someone named Abigail, detailing strange occurrences and whispers in the night. "We should leave this place," Lisa said, her voice trembling. But Jake, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's just an old cabin. What's the worst that could happen?" That night, they decided to stay in the cabin. As darkness fell, the forest around them seemed to come alive. They heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, coming from the trees. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just the wind," Jake replied, though he didn't sound convinced. As they tried to sleep, the whispers grew louder, turning into faint, eerie voices. Lisa was the first to disappear. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone, leaving behind only a faint echo of her scream. Panic set in as the remaining friends searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, calling out for Lisa. But there was no sign of her. "We need to leave now," Emily insisted, her voice shaking. They tried to find their way back to the car, but the forest seemed different, twisted. No matter which direction they went, they ended up back at the cabin. "It's like the forest is alive," Tom whispered, his face pale. As the second night approached, the whispers turned into clear voices, calling their names, taunting them. Sarah was next. She wandered into the woods, seemingly in a trance, and never returned. "We have to fight this," Jake said, determined. "We can't just give up." They discovered that the symbols in the cabin were part of a ritual to ward off evil spirits. Desperately, they tried to replicate it, but without understanding the full context, it backfired. Emily was the next to go, dragged away by unseen forces while Jake and Tom watched helplessly. Realizing they were out of options, they decided to confront whatever was haunting them. In the darkest part of the night, the whispers culminated into a tangible presence, a shadowy figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. It moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "You should have left," it whispered, its voice echoing inside their heads. Jake and Tom fought desperately, using the symbols and anything they could find to fend off the entity. In the chaos, Tom was taken, leaving Jake alone. With the last of his strength, Jake managed to light a makeshift torch and thrust it at the entity. It recoiled, giving him a chance to run. He sprinted through the forest, the whispers and shadows chasing him, until he burst out into the clearing where their car was parked. He didn't look back as he drove away, the whispers fading behind him, but he knew he would never escape the nightmares that followed. Jake was the sole survivor, forever haunted by the experience. The forest and the cabin remained, waiting for the next unsuspecting group to stumble upon its dark secrets. The small town of Harperville was known for its old legends and eerie tales, but none were as notorious as the ones surrounding the abandoned Harperville Hospital. Decades ago, the hospital had been shut down after a series of inexplicable deaths, all occurring in the same ward. It was said that those who ventured into the cursed ward never returned the same. A paranormal investigation team decided to spend the night in the abandoned hospital, determined to capture evidence of the supernatural. The team consisted of 5 members: Julia, the lead investigator; Mike, the tech expert; Karen, the historian; Dave, the skeptic; and Anna, the psychic. They were well prepared with state-of-the-art equipment and a deep curiosity to uncover the truth. "Are we really doing this?" Dave asked, his skepticism evident even as they stood at the entrance of the hospital. "Yes, we are," Julia replied firmly. "This is our chance to find real evidence. The stories about this place are too compelling to ignore." "Just remember to stay together and keep your cameras rolling," Mike added, checking his equipment one last time. They pushed open the rusted doors and stepped inside, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. The interior of the hospital was as chilling as its reputation suggested. Broken tiles littered the floor and the walls were covered in graffiti and decay. The faint smell of mold and mildew permeated the air. They moved through the main lobby, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. "We'll set up our base here," Julia announced, pointing to a room near the entrance. "From here, we can monitor all the cameras and equipment." Mike began setting up the cameras and motion sensors, strategically placing them throughout the hospital. Karen, armed with a flashlight and a notebook, started documenting their surroundings while Anna tried to sense any spiritual presence. "It's so quiet," Anna whispered, her eyes scanning the dark corners. "Too quiet." "That's what makes it exciting," Julia replied, her voice tinged with anticipation. As the team finished their preparations, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The hospital seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the night to unfold. With everything in place, the team decided to split up and explore different parts of the hospital. Julia and Anna headed toward the cursed ward, while Mike, Karen, and Dave explored the other areas. The cursed ward was located on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The closer they got, the colder the air seemed to become. Anna shivered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Do you feel that?" Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Julia replied, her own breath misting. "It's freezing in here." As they approached the ward, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, foreboding space. Julia and Anna stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with old hospital beds, their metal frames rusted and broken. The walls were covered in peeling paint and old, faded medical charts. Suddenly, Anna gasped, clutching her chest. "I can feel them," she said, her voice shaking. "The spirits. They're angry." Julia turned on her camera, capturing the moment. "Tell me what you're feeling, Anna." Anna closed her eyes, focusing on the energy around her. They were patients here, but something went wrong. They suffered, and now they're trapped. They're trying to tell us something. Meanwhile, Mike, Karen, and Dave were experiencing their own strange occurrences. Mike's equipment began to malfunction, the cameras flickering and the motion sensors going off without any visible cause. "Something's not right," Mike muttered, checking the connections. "These shouldn't be acting up like this." Karen, exploring a different corridor, suddenly heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but no one was there. "Guys, did you hear that?" she asked through the walkie-talkie. "Hear what?" Dave replied, still skeptical. "Footsteps, right behind me." "Stay together," Mike instructed, his tone serious. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Back in the cursed ward, Julia and Anna continued their investigation. As Anna reached out with her psychic abilities, a chilling voice echoed through the room. Help us! Julia's camera captured the moment, the voice clear and distinct. Did you hear that? She asked, her heart pounding. Yes, Anna replied, her face pale. They're trying to communicate. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and a cold breeze swept through, rustling the old medical charts. The air was thick with a sense of dread, as if the spirits were closing in on them. Determined to find answers, Julia and Anna searched the room for any clues about the spirit's suffering. They found an old journal hidden in a drawer, its pages yellowed with age. As Julia read aloud, the horrifying truth began to unfold. The journal belonged to Dr. Edward Reynolds, a doctor who had once worked at the hospital. He detailed a series of experiments conducted on the patients in the cursed ward. These experiments were meant to cure a rare disease, but they went horribly wrong. The patients suffered unimaginable pain, and many died under Dr. Reynolds' care. He was trying to play God, Julia said, her voice trembling. These people, they were his guinea pigs. Anna closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. No wonder they're angry. They want justice. As they read further, they discovered that Dr. Reynolds had attempted to cover up his failures. The hospital administration had been complicit, hiding the truth to avoid scandal. The cursed ward had been sealed off, and the hospital eventually closed, leaving the spirits of the tormented patients trapped within. We have to find a way to free them, Julia said, her resolve strengthening. We can't let their suffering continue. Julia and Anna rejoined Mike, Karen, and Dave, sharing what they had discovered. The team decided to hold a seance in the cursed ward, hoping to communicate directly with the spirits and offer them peace. They gathered in a circle, their hands joined as Anna began to chant softly. The room grew colder, and the air seemed to thrum with energy. The spirits made their presence known, their whispers filling the room. We're here to help, Anna said, her voice calm and steady. Tell us what we need to do to free you. The spirits responded, their voices a mixture of pain and desperation. The doctor must be exposed. Our story must be told. Julia, her camera still recording, nodded. We will tell your story. We will make sure the world knows what happened here. As they continued the seance, the spirits began to calm, the atmosphere in the room shifting from anger to relief. They could feel the grip of the past loosening, the spirits' hold on the hospital weakening. Just as they thought they were making progress, a violent force swept through the room, knocking over equipment and shattering windows. The spirit of Dr. Reynolds appeared, his face twisted in rage. You will not take them from me, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the halls. The team recoiled in terror as the malevolent spirit advanced. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pulsating with dark energy. Anna, her voice steady despite her fear, confronted the spirit. You have no power here anymore. The truth is out, and your hold on these souls is broken. Dr. Reynolds' spirit shrieked in fury, but the power of the team's combined resolve began to push him back. The air crackled with energy as they stood their ground, refusing to let fear take hold. Following Anna's guidance, they performed a cleansing ritual, using sage and salt to purify the space. The spirit of Dr. Reynolds struggled against them, but the power of the ritual was too strong. As the final words of the ritual were spoken, a blinding light filled the room. The spirit of Dr. Reynolds let out one last, anguished cry before dissolving into the light. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and release. The spirits of the patients, now free from their torment, expressed their gratitude. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the whispers faded into silence. The team exited the hospital at dawn, their faces etched with both relief and exhaustion. They had faced the unknown and come out the other side, forever changed by the experience. Julia reviewed the footage, knowing they had captured something truly extraordinary. The story of the cursed ward and the suffering of its patients would finally be told. As they packed up their equipment, Mike turned to Julia. "Do you think they found peace?" Julia nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. "I believe they did. And now, it's up to us to make sure their story is heard." The team left Harperville Hospital behind, but the memory of that night would stay with them forever. They had faced true darkness and emerged with a story that would haunt them for the rest of their lives.